What's up, friends? Welcome to episode 1 of What the Social Work. I'm so excited about this series. If you don't know, social work is something that I'm truly passionate about. It is what I do for a living. So I'm a firm believer that you should be very passionate about, or at least like what you do, because you spend the majority of your time at work. So today we are starting a series. Well, first we're drinking some coffee. I thought I would get out my fall mug. And please excuse my hair. It's Friday. I've been running errands. Leave me alone. All right. So let me take a little sippy sip. All right. I'm going to set her right there. I had a little coffee with my cream. So yes, today I'm so excited to be starting this series. I'm calling it What the Social Work because a lot of times people ask me questions and are like, what the heck's up with this? Why can't you do this for me? Why can't you do this? And blah, blah, blah. So I am here to tell you and explain to you all things social work. I'm going to explain from my perspective of how I became a social worker. So from the beginning to where I am now. And then I'm also going to dive into you or your loved one or anyone as a consumer of working with a social worker or a case manager within the hospital setting. I know it can be rough knowing how to navigate things that may come your way when you're in the hospital. So I'm hoping to cover all the things, and hopefully when you watch this video, you will learn something that you did not know previously, or maybe you will learn something that adds on to your current knowledge. So that's the goal. So anyways, we are going to start from the beginning, and I will tell you that I did not grow up going, oh yeah, I want to be a social worker, I want to save the world. That's definitely not where I started. So I graduated high school when I was 17 years old, and that was in 2010. I took a year off from college. I worked in a restaurant. I was a hostess, I was a server, and that was any experience is valuable experience in my opinion. So I truly enjoyed that. And then I was like, all right, we need to go to college. Erin, we need to figure out what we're doing with our lives, etc., etc. So I started school. I started at Kennesaw State University, which is in Kennesaw, Georgia. And I did my core classes, and I'm just like, la, 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 trying to figure out what I want to do. I changed my major probably like, I don't know, 3 or 4 times. I was an exercise health science major. God knows why, because I'm not that into exercise or like nutrition. And then I was a nursing major. I do come from a line of nurses. My grandmother was a nurse for like 40 plus years. And we will talk about her later because she is one of the biggest reasons why I am where I'm at today. So I actually met her for lunch today, and I told her, I said, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you. But we'll talk about that later. So I tried to do the nursing courses, the maths, the sciences, and I truly, truly, truly sucked. Like I just did not enjoy it at all. And I have testing anxiety, so that didn't help my situation. And I just truly was not invested wholeheartedly into these classes. So I'm like, well, shoot, come on, Opie. Come sit here. So I was like, shoot, what am I gonna do? So I did get my first job working in a hospital. I worked as they call it environmental services in the hospital setting, and that is essentially you're a housekeeper. You're keeping the rooms clean. You're keeping the main areas, excuse my cat, the main areas clean. And just honestly, these people who do this job do not get the credit that they deserve. Like we have, Nurses Week, and we just celebrated Case Management Week, but I feel like environmental services or housekeeping, they do not get the recognition that they deserve, because they are essentially the core of a hospital setting, because they are the ones who are working on infection prevention and making sure that patients do not get other infections that they didn't even come to the hospital with. Those are called hospital acquired infections. And that's like when you broke your leg or something, and then you end up having pneumonia, or you end up having like a central line infection, or you end up having like C. diff, which is it's a smelly infection. Google it. So yeah, that is what their priority is. And that's so important in healthcare. And that's so important in a school setting. And that's so important, like when you go stay at a hotel, you want your room to be clean, right? So I recommend next time you see somebody who works as a housekeeper, as a janitor, as anything related to cleaning and making sure that your environment is safe, just say thank you. I mean, that they definitely don't get the recognition that they deserve. So I did that for about a year, and then I was still kind of like teetering with the idea of becoming a nurse. I decided to get my certified nursing assistant certification, and I took a 6 to 8 week class learning how to take vitals, how to make a bed, how to do activities of daily living, also called ADLs, which is bathing, getting yourself dressed, getting yourself out of bed, how to wear a gait belt, how to stand when you're getting somebody out of bed, things like that, which seem pretty minor, but if you think about it, and if you've experienced this before yourself or with a family member, when you're in the hospital and you're sick, a lot of times you're weak and you're not able to do these things for yourself. So there are professionals that are needed in order to get these things done and do them properly. So I took that course. I took a state exam. And so I graduated, and then I ended up applying for a job to work at our local children's hospital, which my grandmother, who was working there at the time, she helped me get a job there. And so I'm so grateful for that, because this is kind of where my journey really started and how I truly figured out what I wanted to do. So thank you so much, Grandma, for taking a chance on me and helping me with that. I really appreciate it. So I started working there. I worked for a float pool. So I worked at 3 different hospitals in Atlanta, and I had 3 jobs. I didn't do them all at once, but you were assigned based on what the staffing need was. So my first job was to be the CNA, to be the patient care tech and take vitals, document input, output, do daily weights, do activities of daily living, stuff like that. So that was one job. My second job was to be a secretary. So I answered the phones and did data entry and arranged like for patients to go to different facilities and whatnot. So that was my second job. My third job, and the job that I feel really gave me the most insight, was I was a safety sitter. So I would often sit with pretty low-key patients, like little kids who like pulled all their stuff out, their IVs, their tubes, whatever. And essentially they were there because they needed these things. So you had to prevent them from pulling them out. And then it ranged up until we had patients who had like cognitive disorders, or they had a developmental delay that would essentially make giving care harder. And if they were by themselves, it was just not sometimes a good situation. And then we had our 1013 patients who were on a suicidal or psychiatric hold and were awaiting medical clearance for placement at a psychiatric facility. So they had to have a one-on-one sitter just for the high risk of harming themselves. And that was where I learned a lot about what a social worker does. I learned a lot about like things that go on in the world as far as like kids these days. At the time, cyberbullying was a big thing, just bullying in general. And then like a lot of kids would overdose just because of things that were going on in their lives, whether it was their home environment or something that happened at school. And so it really gave me insight into like the problems that were going on with our youth during that time. So I really learned a lot as far as from that aspect. And so I did this job for 7 years. And when I tell you that this was the biggest time in my life where I just had a lot of growth. I grew as a person and figured out who I was and what I wanted to be. And during this time, I was still in college, and I finally settled on getting my degree in psychology. So I did graduate with my bachelor's degree in psychology in 2016. And then after that, I was just like, what do I do now? I still didn't know what I wanted to do. So I am a person of faith. So I just kept praying about it and just kept working my job at the children's hospital and just hoping that I would figure it out. And it happened. It kind of just fell in my lap. So one night I was at work and I was talking to a patient who I knew very well from her multiple admissions. She had a chronic illness called cystic fibrosis. And if you're not familiar with what cystic fibrosis is, it is a infection of the lungs. It's a serious infection that is lifelong, chronic, and you are often diagnosed with it as a baby. And there's a lot of treatment that goes into it. You get daily breathing treatments. You have to take a lot of medication. You have to miss a lot of school because you're in the hospital every month almost. And so it's a heavy diagnosis to live with. So I was talking to this patient and she had recently graduated high school. And so I asked what anybody would ask her. I'm like, what's next for you? Are you going to go to college? What are your plans? And y'all, I will never forget her turning around and looking at me. And she just straight up said, well, I'm not going to college because that's a waste of time because I don't know how long I'm going to live. And she was so serious. And I was just taken aback by just the whole picture of her not feeling like she was worthy of having goals, ambitions, or anything because of this chronic illness. And I said to her, I said, listen, I don't know what it's like to be you and to be living with this illness that pretty much consumes your life. But I do know that you and I have something in common along with everybody else, and that is chronic illness or not, none of us are promised tomorrow. And so something could happen to me tomorrow. So my take is that we should start living for today. Because like I said, we're not promised anything. We're not promised tomorrow. We're not promised next week. So I don't want you to let your illness impact having goals and doing the things that you want to do. And she really didn't say anything to me. I think she was just already so heavily consumed in, I know she suffered with depression and things like that, just because that often does come along with chronic illness because it does consume you. But it was just so hard for me to hear her say that when I wanted her to value herself as a human being and the things that she would like to do in life. So that was really hard. But I think that bomb was kind of dropped on me in order to really figure out what I wanted to do. So I decided that I wanted to do counseling or social work and work with patients that suffer from chronic illness. And my goal was to help them reach their full potential outside of their illness, whether that was going to college or that was getting a job or working on areas in their life with family and friends and just doing the things that they want to do and not putting this time cap on their life, because that's just not gonna do anything for anybody. So I started looking and researching into what I could do, and I started noticing that we had social workers in the hospital, which I honestly had never really noticed before. And so I reached out to some of them and just kind of got an idea of where they started. And so I applied to grad school and I got accepted. I think it was like a month later. It took like a month for my application to be reviewed. And I actually found out while I was working one night at the hospital. And so when I say that I truly grew as a person within those walls, I am not lying. So I got accepted into grad school. I went to Kennesaw State University, which was where I went for my bachelor's degree. And yeah, that's where I'm going to end this video. I wanted to kind of preface, this whole series on where I got started, because I think that a lot of people struggle with that. They struggle with struggle with making goals in general sometimes, but also struggle on where do I start? And sometimes you don't know, there's not an answer to that. Sometimes you just have to keep going in order to find where you're going to get to or where you need to start, if that makes sense. So I'm hoping that my experience will help somebody keep moving forward and trying to achieve just getting started, because that in itself is the biggest barrier that you can put in front of yourself, is getting started. So I hope that this was helpful for someone out there in that aspect. So I hope you come back for part 2 where I talk about my grad school experience, because it's really something, and my internship experiences. I'll go into depth about that. And then as we move on, I'll talk about how I ended up working, or well, continuing to work in healthcare. And so I'm super excited to share this with you. And then once we go beyond my personal experience, I'll start talking about what are the things that social workers and case managers have to offer in healthcare. Now, mind you, I do live in Georgia, so this is based on my knowledge of working in a Georgia hospital. So this may not be the same in hospitals that, in other states or even out of the country. So please be advised of that. But maybe this will help you get started somewhere and provoke some of the questions that maybe you need to ask in order to help yourself or your loved one. And those of you who are thinking about becoming a social worker or are in grad school or whatever you're doing, just know that I am rooting for you, and please reach out if there's anything that I can help you with or questions that I can answer. I am truly here for you, and I'm truly looking to help those who are wanting to go into the field. So I will see you guys at episode 2. I hope you have a blessed day, and thank you so much for your support, and I will see you next time.